My name is Sister Maria, and for as long as I can remember, my life has belonged to God. I dedicated myself to Him not out of duty, not because it was expected of me, but because I knew in the depths of my soul that there was no greater purpose than to love, serve, and follow Him with all my heart. From the moment I first stepped into the convent as a young woman, I knew that this was where I was meant to be. The walls of the abbey became my home. The sisters around me became my family, and the work of God became my life. Every day was a chance to grow closer to Him, to seek His presence, to understand His will, and to share His love with those who needed it most. I spent my years teaching, praying, and guiding others. I comforted the sick, fed the hungry, and held the hands of the lonely. I prayed for those who had lost their way and rejoiced for those who had found their faith again. I spent hours in silent contemplation before the Blessed Sacrament, whispering prayers, listening for His voice. In those quiet moments, I often thought about what awaited beyond this life. I had no fear of death. Death was not an end, but a passage, a doorway that led to something far greater than this world could ever offer. I had always believed that with my whole heart, yet I sometimes wondered, what would it be like? Would I recognize the moment when it came? Would I be ready when God finally called me home? When I was diagnosed with cancer, I did not question God's will. The doctors told me it had already spread too far. There were treatments, but they would only prolong what was inevitable. I did not see it as a battle to fight. I saw it as another step in the journey, one that I would walk with faith, just as I had walked every path God had set before me. My sisters in the convent were devastated. They wept, they prayed, they begged God for a miracle. I told them not to grieve. God's plan is always perfect, I reminded them, and if He calls me home, then I will go with joy. The days passed, and my body grew weaker. The pain came in waves, but I never let it steal my faith. The sisters took care of me, reading scripture to me when my eyes grew too tired, praying over me when the pain became too much to bear. I could feel their love in every moment, in every whispered prayer, in every gentle hand that brushed my forehead or adjusted my pillows. The love of God was all around me, shining through them, reminding me that I was never alone. I knew the end was near when I could barely lift my hand to make the sign of the cross. I could hear them praying around me, their voices soft, filled with love and sorrow. I wanted to tell them not to cry, but my strength was fading. My breath slowed, and in those final moments, I felt a warmth settle over me, a peace so deep that it made every pain, every weakness, every earthly burden disappear. Then, in an instant, I was no longer in pain. The moment my final breath left my body, I knew something had changed. The pain that had weighed on me for so long was gone. The weakness that had confined me, the heavy, aching exhaustion that had made even the smallest movement difficult, had disappeared. I felt light, weightless, in a way I had never known before. It was as if all the burdens of the physical world had been lifted from me, and for the first time in what felt like years, I could move freely. But I was not moving with my body. I was being moved, carried by something greater, something beyond my own understanding. I looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening, and then I saw it. I saw myself. There I was, lying in the bed, my hands folded over my chest, my face peaceful, in a way that only those who have left this world can look. The sisters were still gathered around me, their heads bowed in prayer, their voices soft and steady. reciting the same words we had spoken together so many times before. Some of them had tears in their eyes, others had their hands clasped tightly, holding onto their rosaries as if they could keep me with them just a little longer. But I felt no sorrow. I did not feel the pull of that body, nor the fear of what was happening. There was only peace. I understood, in an instant, that I was no longer bound to that earthly form. The body in the bed had served me well, but it was never truly me. I was so much more than that shell, and now I had been set free. Then I felt it, a warmth unlike anything I had ever known. It began softly, surrounding me like the gentle embrace of a long-lost friend. It was not heat, not like the warmth of the sun or the comfort of a fire, but something deeper, something alive. It reached inside me, filling every part of my being, every memory, every thought, every part of who I was, wrapping around me like a love that had always been there, waiting for me to return. The room began to fade, not in a way that was sudden or jarring, but like the slow, peaceful transition of night, giving way to dawn. The soft glow of candlelight and the whispered prayers of my sisters melted into something far greater, something beyond time and space, something that felt more real than anything I had ever known. I was being drawn toward it. I did not walk, I did not run, I simply moved, as though the very essence of my soul was being pulled forward, carried by the warmth that now surrounded me. There was no fear, not even for a moment. There was only joy. And then I saw it, the light. It was not the kind of light that we know on earth. It was not just bright, not just golden or white, not something that could be described in words. It was alive, pulsing with a beauty that was beyond human comprehension. It was vast, stretching infinitely in every direction. But it was not empty. It was filled with something I could not yet fully grasp, but knew was more wonderful than anything I had ever imagined. As I moved toward it, I felt something change within me. Every question I had ever carried in my heart about life, about death, about God's plan, was no longer a mystery. The answers were not spoken, but they were simply known. I did not need to ask. The truth was woven into the very fabric of this place, and I understood it completely. This was home. It was not that I recognized it as a place I had been before, but rather it was the feeling of belonging so perfectly that nothing else had ever felt as real as this. I knew without a doubt that this was where I had been created to be. Then something else happened. I became aware of a presence. It was vast, powerful, and filled with a love so deep that I could not contain it. It was closer than my own breath, and yet it surrounded everything. It was the source of the warmth I had felt, the reason for the overwhelming peace, the love that held me in a way I had never known before. And I knew it was Him, Jesus. I did not need to see His face to know that He was there. I did not need an introduction or an explanation. His presence alone was enough. Every fiber of my soul recognized Him instantly, like a long-lost child returning to the arms of a father who had been waiting all along. At that moment, everything I had ever believed, everything I had ever taught, everything I had ever hoped for was real before me. There was no doubt, no uncertainty. He was not just an idea, not just a figure in Scripture, but alive, present, and more real than anything I had ever known. I felt His love before I saw Him. It washed over me like waves, each one carrying something deeper, more overwhelming, more beautiful than the last. It was not just love as we know it. It was perfect, consuming, absolute love, the kind that sees every part of you and still loves completely. Then, through the brilliance of the light He stepped forward. I could not speak. I could not move. I could only be in his presence, overcome by the reality that this was my Savior, my God, standing before me. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I knew that he had seen my entire life, every moment of service, every whispered prayer, every time I had reached out to help someone, every time I had fallen short, every hidden doubt, every act of faith. He had seen it all, and yet, in his eyes, there was no condemnation, only love. Love that had no limits, no conditions, no hesitation. I had so many things I wanted to say, so many questions, so many emotions rushing through me all at once. But before I could speak, he reached out his hand. The moment he did, everything around us shifted, and suddenly I knew this was just the beginning of what he wanted to show me. As I moved deeper into the light, I felt something shift around me. It was as though the very air carried life, filled with something indescribable, something beyond human words. Every step, or perhaps every movement, since I was not walking in the way I had on earth, brought me closer to something I could not yet see, but knew was there. My soul recognized it before my eyes did. It was a presence, one that felt so vast and powerful, yet so deeply personal that it filled every part of me. Then I saw him, standing before me, radiant beyond anything I had ever imagined. It was Jesus, not an image or an idea, not a vision or a distant figure from Scripture, but real, alive, present, more tangible than anything I had ever known. His light was unlike the light around me. It was not just brightness, but love itself, emanating from him in waves so deep and strong that it moved through me, filling every empty space within my soul. His face held wisdom, kindness, and love beyond human comprehension. There was something in his eyes, infinite understanding, complete knowledge of who I was, of everything I had ever done, every thought I had ever had, every doubt, every moment of faith, every tear, every joy. And yet there was no condemnation, no disappointment, no distance. There was only love, pure, absolute, unconditional love. For a moment, I could not move, not because I was afraid, but because I was overwhelmed by the reality of standing in his presence. I had spent my entire life seeking him, praying to him, surrendering to his will, longing for this very moment, and now here he was, right before me. I felt so small, not in an unworthy way, but in a way that made me understand how vast and boundless his love truly was. Tears welled up in my eyes, not from sadness, not even from joy, but from the sheer depth of love that radiated from him. I felt as if I had come home, as if everything I had ever longed for, everything I had ever struggled to understand, had been leading me to this very moment. Without thinking, I fell to my knees. I did not do it out of obligation or habit. My body simply could not remain standing in the presence of such glory, such holiness, such love. My hands trembled as I tried to find the words to speak. But what could I possibly say? What words could ever be enough in the presence of the one who created me, the one who had loved me before I even knew what love was? I wanted to tell him how much I had longed for this moment, how much I had tried to serve him, how deeply I had believed in his promises. I wanted to ask him the questions I had carried in my heart for so long, about suffering, about faith, about the things I had never fully understood. But before I could form a single word, he moved toward me. He reached out his hand. The moment his hand extended toward me, everything around us shifted. It was as though the very fabric of this place responded to his presence. The air became even more alive, more saturated with love and holiness. Time felt different. No longer something measured in seconds or minutes, but something eternal, unbroken, complete. When his hand touched mine, I felt a surge of warmth and peace, unlike anything I had ever known. It was not just a touch, it was as if his very essence poured into me, filling every part of my being with something greater than joy, greater than peace, greater than anything I had ever felt before. In that moment, my entire life played before me, but it was not like a simple memory. It was alive, as though I was watching and feeling every moment all over again, but through his eyes. I saw my childhood, the moment I first felt God's call, the day I took my vows, the years of service in the convent, the moments of doubt, the moments of faith. I saw every act of kindness, every moment I had loved others as he had asked me to, every prayer I had whispered in the silence of the chapel. But I also saw the missed opportunities, the moments when I had let fear hold me back, the times I had hesitated instead of trusting fully in his plan. Yet even as I saw these things, I felt no shame, no regret, no judgment. There was only love and understanding. I realized that he had seen every moment of my life, even the ones I had thought were small and insignificant, and yet he had never stopped loving me, never stopped guiding me, never stopped drawing me closer to him. Then he spoke. His voice was unlike anything I had ever heard, not just a sound, but something that resonated deep within me, filling every part of who I was. It was both gentle and powerful, both comforting and commanding, both familiar and completely beyond anything I had ever known. "My beloved child," he said, his voice carrying more warmth than the sun, more love than the deepest ocean. "I have always been with you." Tears streamed down my face as the weight of his words settled into my soul. He had always been with me, in every moment of joy, in every season of struggle, in every prayer spoken and unspoken, in every fear, in every doubt. He had been there, even in the moments when I had wondered if I was doing enough, if I was truly following his will, if I was truly living as he desired. He had never abandoned me, never stopped loving me, never stopped guiding me. I wanted to stay there forever, in that moment, in his presence, in the perfect peace of knowing that I was fully known and fully loved. But then his expression changed. There was still love, still warmth, but now there was also purpose. "There is something I need to show you," he said, and in that instant, everything around us changed. The radiance of his presence did not fade, but suddenly we were moving, not through space, not through time, but into something even greater, something I could not yet understand. The light expanded, the very air around us shifted, and I knew that whatever was about to happen next, it was something that would change everything. I did not ask where we were going. I did not need to. I trusted him completely. The moment Jesus took my hand, everything changed. It was not like stepping forward in the way I had moved on earth. It was something greater, something more profound, as if time and space had folded away, and suddenly I was somewhere entirely new. The brilliance of the light remained, but it was no longer just surrounding me. It was alive, woven into everything, flowing through the very air. I stood on what seemed like solid ground, yet it was not like any surface I had ever walked on before. It was not cold or hard or unyielding. Instead, it felt as though it welcomed me, as if every part of this place existed in harmony, responding to the presence of life. The colors were beyond anything I had ever seen, not just brighter or more vivid, but infused with a kind of living beauty, as though the very fabric of this place pulsed with the presence of God. I turned slowly, taking in everything around me, and my heart nearly stopped at what I saw. Ahead of me stretched gardens so beautiful, so breathtakingly perfect, that my mind struggled to comprehend them. Flowers of every color, some familiar, some beyond anything on earth, bloomed in radiant harmony. Their petals seemed to glow, as if illuminated from within, and their fragrance filled the air with a sweetness that stirred something deep within my soul. The trees that stood throughout the garden were tall and majestic, their leaves shimmering in a way that suggested they were more than just trees. They were part of something greater, something divine. A river flowed nearby, its waters clear and shimmering with a golden light that reflected the very essence of heaven itself. The sound of it was unlike any water I had ever heard. It was not just the gentle rush of a stream. It was music, a harmony, a song woven into the very presence of this place. Every part of creation seemed to exist in perfect unity, not separate, but connected in a way that felt more real than anything I had ever known. The sky above me was not just blue, not just endless. It was alive, shifting in shades of gold and white and soft pastels, as if it was an extension of the light that filled this entire kingdom. There was no sun, yet everything was illuminated with a perfect radiance, a glow that did not cast shadows because there was no darkness, no imperfection, no flaw in this place. And then I saw them, the people. They were everywhere, yet it did not feel crowded. They moved with joy, with peace, with a kind of lightness that could only come from being completely and eternally free. Their faces shone, not just from light, but from something deeper, something purer, something that radiated from within. Some of them walked along the gardens, others stood in groups, speaking, not with words, but with a connection that bypassed language itself, a form of understanding that was deeper than anything I had ever experienced. I saw them turn toward me, and in that instant, I knew them all, even those I had never met before, even those whose faces were unfamiliar to me, felt as if they had always been a part of me. There was no division, no distance between souls, only a unity so profound that I understood what true belonging really meant. One by one, they smiled at me, and I felt their welcome, not just in my mind, but in my soul. There was no need for introductions. They knew me, and I knew them. Because here, in the kingdom of heaven, we were all family, not by blood, but by the love of God that connected every soul who had ever surrendered to Him. I turned to Jesus, my heart so full that I thought it might burst. "Is this?" I began, but before I could even finish the question, He nodded. "This is my Father's house," He said. I felt the truth of His words deep inside me, a certainty beyond anything I had ever known. I was home. Tears of pure joy streamed down my face, not from sorrow, not from longing, but from the overwhelming perfection of what I was seeing, of what I was feeling. This was not a dream, not an illusion, but the reality of eternity, the fulfillment of every promise God had ever made. I wanted to run forward, to explore, to embrace the people around me, to fall to my knees in praise. But before I could move, Jesus gently placed His hand on my shoulder, and in an instant, the world around us shifted again. We were standing in a new place, yet it was still part of heaven. Before me was a great city, unlike anything I had ever seen. The buildings were not just made of stone or glass. They were woven with light itself, their surfaces shimmering as though they carried the very presence of God. The streets were golden, yet they did not shine with earthly wealth, but with divine beauty. a reflection of the glory of heaven. I saw angels, their forms radiant, moving with purpose, singing in a way that filled the air with a melody that was both worship and joy intertwined. I could feel their praise in every part of me, as though the very structure of heaven itself was built upon unceasing adoration for the one who created all things. Jesus turned to me and spoke again. "This is what I have prepared for those who love me." His words were not just a promise. They were a reality, a fulfillment, a truth so certain that I knew nothing in all of creation could change it. And yet, I felt something else stir inside me. It was a longing, not for this place, but for something unfinished, a knowledge that there were still so many on earth who had not yet seen what I had seen, who did not yet understand the depth of what awaited them. Jesus must have seen the thought cross my mind, because he nodded. "There is still more I must show you," he said. Once again, the world around us shifted, and I knew that I was about to understand something even greater than I had before. As I stood beside Jesus, surrounded by the beauty of heaven, I felt a peace so deep that it was beyond anything I had ever imagined. The love of God was not just something I felt. It was something that flowed through me, something that filled every part of me in a way that was impossible to describe with earthly words. I wanted to stay there forever, to soak in this presence, to never leave this place where there was no sorrow, no fear, no uncertainty, only perfect love. But then Jesus turned to me, and though his expression was filled with gentleness, I saw something else in his eyes, purpose. I knew at that moment that he was about to show me something important, something that I was meant to understand, not just for myself, but for those still living on earth. He spoke, but not in a way that required words. His voice was inside me, filling my soul with understanding beyond human language. His words did not just enter my mind, they became part of me, as if truth itself was being written upon my heart. "You have always known my love," he said, his voice filled with tenderness, "but now you will understand just how deep it truly goes." In an instant, everything around us shifted. It was not a sudden change, not something abrupt or jarring. It was as though a veil had been lifted, allowing me to see more than I ever had before. Suddenly, I was no longer just in heaven. I was seeing through the eyes of God. I saw every soul on earth, each one known, each one loved beyond measure. I saw those who were lost in sorrow, who had suffered unbearable pain, who felt forgotten and alone. And yet I also saw how God had never abandoned a single one of them. He was there, in every moment, in every cry of the heart, in every silent prayer, spoken in the darkness. Even when they did not feel him, even when they doubted him, he was always there. I saw the moments when people had pushed God away, when they had chosen bitterness over love, when they had turned their backs on his mercy. And yet, his love never wavered. It remained, waiting, always ready to embrace them the moment they turned back. His patience was beyond anything I had ever imagined. No one was ever beyond his reach. No one was ever truly lost, unless they chose to be. Jesus then showed me something else, the power of forgiveness. I saw people who had carried hatred and resentment in their hearts for years, believing that their pain was too great to let go of. But I also saw how unforgiveness was like chains around their souls, holding them back from the peace God longed to give them. I saw how when a person truly forgave, not just with words, but with their heart, a light would break through those chains, setting them free. Forgiveness was not just something we did for others, it was something that allowed God's love to fully enter our own hearts. Tears of pure joy streamed down my face as I stood in heaven, overwhelmed by its perfection. This was no dream, it was eternity, the fulfillment of every promise God had ever made. The air was filled with a warmth that seemed to embrace me, a love so profound, it felt as though it had been waiting for me all my life. I wanted to run forward, to explore, to embrace the people around me, but before I could move, Jesus gently placed his hand on my shoulder. His touch was both comforting and electrifying, a reminder that I was in the presence of the one who had created all things. His eyes, filled with infinite kindness, met mine, and in that moment, I knew I was home. In an instant, the world shifted. We stood before a radiant city, its structures woven with light, their surfaces shimmering as though they carried the very presence of God. The streets were golden, but not in the way of earthly wealth. They glowed with a divine beauty that seemed to pulse with life. The light itself seemed alive, dancing and flowing like a river of pure joy. Angels moved among the city, their forms radiant, their songs filling the air with melodies that were both worship and joy intertwined. I could feel their praise in every part of me, as though the very structure of heaven itself was built upon unceasing adoration for the one who created all things. The harmony of their voices was unlike anything I had ever heard, a symphony of love that resonated deep within my soul. Jesus turned to me and said, "This is what I've prepared for those who love me." His words were not just a promise, they were a reality, unshakable and true. I felt the weight of his love in every syllable, a love that had been poured out for humanity since the beginning of time. Yet even in this moment of overwhelming joy, I felt a longing stir within me, not for heaven, but for those still on earth who didn't know this truth. Jesus nodded, understanding my thoughts before I could even speak them. "There's more I must show you," he said. The world shifted again, and I saw through God's eyes every soul on earth, known and loved. I saw their pain, their struggles, and how God never abandoned them, even when they turned away. His love was constant, his patience endless. I saw people who had suffered unbearable loss, who had cried out in the darkness, who had felt forgotten and alone. And yet, I also saw how God had been there in every moment, in every tear, in every silent prayer. Even when they didn't feel him, even when they doubted him, he was always there. I saw a mother weeping over the loss of her child, her heart shattered by grief. But I also saw how God held her in his arms, whispering words of comfort that she couldn't yet hear. I saw a man who had spent his life chasing success, only to find himself empty and broken. But I also saw how God had been waiting for him, ready to fill that emptiness with his love. Jesus then showed me the power of forgiveness. I saw people who had carried hatred and resentment in their hearts for years, believing that their pain was too great to let go of. But I also saw how unforgiveness was like chains around their souls, holding them back from the peace God longed to give them. When a person truly forgave, not just with words, but with their heart, a light would break through those chains, setting them free. Forgiveness isn't excusing wrongs, Jesus explained. It's releasing the burden to me. Tears filled my eyes as I understood. Forgiveness heals not just others, but ourselves. It allows God's love to fully enter our hearts. I saw a woman who had been betrayed by someone she loved, her heart hardened by bitterness. But when she chose to forgive, The chains around her heart shattered, and she was filled with a peace she had never known. Next, I saw how people wasted their lives, chasing money, status, and distractions, believing they had time to seek God later. But later never came for many. I saw people who had planned to turn to God one day, who had promised themselves they would pray more, trust more, love more. But then their time ran out. Jesus said, "They think they have time, but they don't seek me." His words weighed heavily on me. I saw simple, faithful lives shining brighter in heaven than the world's greatest achievements. God doesn't measure success as we do. He looks at the heart. He looks at how much love we gave, how much we trusted Him, how we treated those around us. I saw a humble farmer who had spent his life caring for his family and helping his neighbors. In heaven, he shone with a radiance that outshone the brightest stars. Jesus turned to me with urgency. They must stop delaying their faith. They must live for me now. I knew I had to return, not because I wanted to leave heaven, but because so many needed to hear this truth. With a heart full of purpose, I whispered, "Lord, I will go." Back on earth, I awoke healed, surrounded by shocked nuns and doctors. My illness was gone, a miracle. I shared my experience, heaven's beauty, Jesus' love, and His message. Faith isn't just belief, I said. It's choosing to live for God every day. Don't wait for someday. Someday may never come. Some believed, others doubted, but I couldn't stay silent. I spent my days sharing Jesus' message, urging people to seek Him now. I spoke in churches, in gatherings, to anyone who would listen. I told them about the love I had felt, the peace I had known, and the urgency of living for God in the present. I knew my time on earth would end, but I wasn't afraid. Heaven was real, and Jesus' love was greater than anything we could imagine. My mission was clear: to tell the world, are you living for God, or are you waiting for someday? Because someday is never guaranteed.